Freeman is a New York Times best-selling author. I love guys who bring books when they come up here. Game Plan, Secret Weapon. He's also the founder and chairman of the NSIC Institute and senior fellow with my good friend Frank Gaffney down there at the Center for Security Policy. Good to see you. Looking forward to the information.
Thank you. I'm going to bring you some more good news because we've had so much of it, right? All the good things going on. America is at war. We've been at war since at least 9/11. And as you know, it's not a war on terror. You don't make war against a tactic. It's a clash of civilizations, a war between the forces of liberty and the forces of tyranny, and it's a war with enemies, both foreign and domestic. And it's largely a cyber-economic war. Our foreign enemies include radicalized Islamists and communist elites repackaged as globalists, those who think you should live differently, whether bowing to Sharia or worshiping the goddess of Mother Earth or surrendering your labor and property for the common good. They all have an agenda. They want to rule you, and they will do so by any means possible. Our domestic enemies are really more insidious. They reflect the same tyrannical ideology, often funded and supported by our foreign enemies. You're told what you can say and what you can't say. You're told what you can think and what you can't think. If you object vocally to the tyranny, you're told that you're a hater or a denier, regardless of how much fact and reason you may have on your side. You're told that you don't have the right to bear arms, even the defense of your family and property. You, who cling so desperately to your guns and religion. You're told the future must not belong to anyone who speaks against the Prophet of Islam or anyone who challenges the climate change orthodoxy. Make no mistake, the agenda of tyranny has every one of us in its crosshairs and is coming at us faster than you can imagine. America, our heritage, our values, and our bold experiment in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is a threat to more than one globalist agenda. And so we're labeled the Great Satan or imperialist pigs. Some of our enemies prefer an overt and direct method, and they've built an arsenal of weapons. They plant terror cells, or they develop electromagnetic pulse bombs that could wipe out our civilization in an instant. North Korea claims that they have just perfected a hydrogen bomb. Whether true or not, they are lurching toward the point that with the press of a button, they could wipe out the electric grid of the United States. Iran, with whom we just signed perhaps the worst agreement of modern times, a nation that recently humiliated our sailors, and to whom we're about to deliver $150 billion, has a doctrine of destroying America with EMP. It's mentioned 20 times in a document that our intelligence services got a copy of. A properly armed Scud missile fired from a barge in the Gulf of Mexico could send us back to a pre-industrial state in the blink of an eye. According to the FBI, every day ISIS is attempting to hack our electric grid, and they have the goal of destroying it. The good news, so far they failed. The bad news, they only have to succeed once. And they have the funding and the access to succeed eventually unless we stop them. Congressional studies suggested that a huge percentage, like 90% of the population, would die if our electric grid were down for a year or more, as could be the case in a successful attack. Too few of us have the capability to grow our own food or compound our own life-saving medicine. Those who survive would be enslaved. These are clearly weapons of tyranny. Only vigilance and the grace of God can protect us from them. There are also those enemies who would rob us of our liberty by other means, gentler means, enslaving us without a massive loss of life. The end result is still tyranny, and in the absence of liberty, Patrick Henry would argue that death would be preferable. The so-called gentler tyranny denies the key precepts of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It starts with campus speech codes, whereby intellectual discourse is eliminated in favor of kindergarten recitations and indoctrinations. Standing firmly against the insidious tide of political correctness, my dear friend Dr. Everett Piper, president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, recently told a student, "This is a university. It's not a daycare." Must we trade our liberty for the comfort of not being offended? Shouldn't the academy be the place for open discourse and new ideas? The battleground is in the workplace as well. Anyone who desires to reflect their values in their vocation should be warned that only the orthodoxy is acceptable. An employee or employer can babble endlessly about the rise of the oceans or the warming of the planet, but say that marriage should be between one man and one woman, and you can be fired. Refuse to participate in a gay wedding as a baker? Pay a fine of $35,000. The tyranny extends further in ways we have sadly already embraced and now celebrate. The government tells you that you cannot negotiate for yourself a rate for your labor below a certain minimum wage. But what if that prevents you from getting a job? Isn't that tyranny too? What if you own property? There's a new orthodoxy at the EPA that tightly controls just what you can do with the property you own. And the Bureau of Land Management might tell you that the property you think you own, you don't really own, even if you have a deed of sale. We know all about this, and we've heard it in our tea parties and from alternative media like Glenn Beck and Breitbart. Even a few of the candidates have made an effort to awaken people to these truths. Hopefully, one of them will ascend to the presidency and quickly beat back the domestic enemies we're facing. But they must also confront head-on the foreign enemies that are attacking us. What you must know, and what the candidates must understand, is that outright war is already underway. It is World War III, and it's being fought principally at this moment in the cyber-economic realm. You've no doubt heard about the hacking on the Office of Personnel Management, or the State Department, or Sony Pictures, or the White House, or the Navy, or the Marine Corps database. Our critical infrastructure have all been hacked, carried out by China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, ISIS. I could go on. But did you notice this year started with a pretty lousy stock market? Nearly all of Wall Street had been projecting 10% plus gains for 2016. Instead, just 2 weeks in, and we have a 10% loss, and the bleeding seems to be accelerating. This was the worst 2-week start to a new year since ever. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was down by almost 400 points on Friday alone. A few years ago, I wrote a book with the title, Secret Weapon: How Economic Terrorism Took Down the U.S. Stock Market and Why It Can Happen Again. Guess what? It seems to be happening again. Regnery published this book in early January 2012. They're a great publisher, great people. In fact, they published my book just a couple of weeks after they published Donald Trump's book, Time to Get Tough. Mr. Trump had a big advertising budget. I was told he had full-page ads in the New York Times. I think he spent more money on promoting his book than he has so far in his presidential campaign. I had no ad budget to speak of, but I did have a prayer team who believed in God. And by some miracle, I got invited to be on the Glenn Beck show the week it came out. Both his book and my book landed on the New York Times bestseller list shortly after they debuted. In the year 2012, Donald Trump's book peaked at number 27. Secret Weapon hit number 17. I was beating him by 10 points. And I didn't advertise. Maybe I should run for president. Now, I have to admit that Mr. Trump's book has been outselling Secret Weapon lately by a big margin. Again, maybe I should run for president. I could sell some books. I think I have nice hair. Like his, mine's real too, see? It's real. Actually, you need to hear the message of Secret Weapon, and so does Mr. Trump, Senator Cruz, Dr. Carson, Senator Rubio, Mrs. Fiorina, Governor Huckabee, Senator Santorum, Governor Bush, Governor Christie, Senator Paul, Governor Kasich, Governor Gilmore. Did I leave anyone out? I don't think so. They need to hear that we're at war right now, and it's cyber economic. When you look at today's stock market and you realize that most of the trading is by high-frequency trading algorithms, computers trading in milliseconds, you begin to understand how vulnerable we really are. Did you know that Russia hacked the NASDAQ a few years ago? Do you know that an alleged Russian spy about a year ago today was arrested because the FBI listened into one of his conversations back to Mother Russia, and he was ordered to find ways to destabilize our stock exchange? Do you know the Chinese have a doctrine of warfare in which crashing our stock market is one of their first weapons? Did you hear about how Middle Eastern investors played a role in the great bear raids against Wall Street firms in 2008? Or how Sharia-compliant press in the Middle East was celebrating the failure of Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers? Did you know that the Chinese told Treasury Secretary Paulson that Russia was trying to kill off Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in the summer of '08 to weaken, destabilize, and maybe collapse America? Do you know that a former KGB agent actually announced that they were this plot as early as 1998 in Europe? Or that the KGB created this plot in the 1950s? We have the documentation. Have you realized that the orchestrated attack on our economy in 2008 was what set the stage and gave us President Barack Obama? Do you know that in 2013, the Chinese official news agency declared that the world must de-Americanize? That since at least 2011, elements in China have been working overtime to create an alternative to the Western financial system. They want to replace the World Bank, replace the SWIFT transaction system. They want to replace the IMF. They want to force the dollar higher and then at the right moment cause the dollar to collapse. Do you know that when oil was around $100 per barrel in 2014, the Saudis announced a plan to drive prices lower to bankrupt the American shale industry and destroy our dreams of energy independence? Do you know that the West today has about $700 trillion in derivative instruments like credit default swaps? No improvement since '08. Are you aware that our reported federal debt of $19 trillion is dwarfed by unfunded liabilities of over $200 trillion? Did you know that the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says that unless we change our fiscal path, we will bankrupt and the dollar will collapse? In my pocket, I carry the currency of a once successful but now failed economy. In 1998, Zimbabwe was producing $100 bills like this one that were worth about $20 US. Then their economy collapsed under the weight of government debt. They tried to print their way out. 10 years later, they were printing $100 trillion bills that weren't worth 1 red cent. This is where our domestic enemies come in. Those in both parties have taken our debt from $10 trillion to $19 trillion in less than 8 years and quadrupled stifling regulation that kills jobs and kills businesses. They are to blame for putting us in such a weakened position. And the Federal Reserve embarked on a campaign after campaign of QE to cover over the problems. But that's only half the equation. The other half is the fact that our foreign enemies see where we're headed and have developed sophisticated cyber-economic weapons to take us down for good. The bottom line is that whether from foreign attack or domestic takedown, our money, our economy is at risk. I wrote another book in 2014, this one titled Game Plan: How to Protect Yourself from the Coming Cyber Economic Attack. It has a personal action plan for protecting your family. It also has an 8-step action plan for saving our country. By the way, you can find both my books, Secret Weapon and Game Plan, on the 3rd floor or at Amazon, or visit secretweapon.org. So what are the 8 steps to make America great again? Here's my list. Number 1, recognize the global war underway. Number 2, take reasonable precautions. By that I mean close the door on some of the critical vulnerabilities I outlined in the book, like naked short selling and hyperactive robot trading. We must also secure the grid, rebuild the military, root out the Sharia threat, reduce our deficit, and secure our borders. Number 3, we need to repatriate the trillions of dollars of American corporate earnings held offshore, unwilling to come back to the United States. Why won't they come back? Taxes. Number 4, we need to support our domestic energy industry. We need to open federal lands. And frankly, we ought to turn over the federal lands to the individual states and let them manage them. Number 5, we must reduce the regulatory burden. Number 6, get a workable tax code. This monstrosity has to go. Number 7, teach what America is all about. That means we dump Common Core. The 8th step really is the most important. Even if we get all the others right, if we miss step number 8, it will all be in vain. You see, we do have very real enemies, foreign and domestic, but the worst enemy is really we, the people. We've been snookered and suckered because of a problem, a heart problem. 2,000 years ago, Jesus told us in Matthew 6:21, he said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." When America was founded, the founders' treasure was liberty. For that, they were willing to sacrifice their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Today, our treasury is money. Too many people are willing to sacrifice liberty for money, or at least for the comfort that it buys. 2,000 years ago, Jesus came to proclaim liberty to the captives, but he also warned that you cannot serve both God and mammon. If you try to serve both, you will love one and hate the other. Which one does America love, and which one does America hate today? The 8th step is to return to our spiritual values, to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. If we do that, Jesus promised all the other things would be added unto us. I have to tell you that our liberty is at risk and our time is short. So what do we do? 2 Chronicles 7:14 tells us, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sins, and I will heal their land." What that tells me is that no matter how big and bad our enemies might be, both foreign and domestic, if God is on our side, we will win. What we need is a Holy Ghost revival to sweep across America like 2 great awakenings happened before. We can have that if we cry out to God. Now, in closing, I have one very important message, quoting Thomas Jefferson. "The God who gave us life also gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is a just God and that his justice cannot sleep forever." If that doesn't drive you to your knees, I don't know what will. God help us, God bless you, and may America repent and return to liberty. Thank you.
Let's take a couple questions. I always feel like I'm blessing someone when I do that. And after that, I feel like that. We have time for a few questions, some quick questions for Kevin. Peter's got the mic here, and our faithful leader for the weekend, Joe Dugan, first man on the mic.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Kevin, in the scenario that you've just presented, what type of investment action are you advocating for people to escape the scenario that you described?
Well, the only thing, there's two answers to that. There's only 2 things working right now, really, and it's U.S. Treasury bonds, which is a form of cash, and cash. I mean, essentially, you get paid nothing, but at least you're not getting killed. Last year was the first time in modern times, in decades, that neither the stock market nor the bond market worked out. It really just didn't. And so in the short term, having a healthy dose of cash is very important. In the long run, you're going to want to have some real money, which means you either diversify into foreign currencies or you have some gold, or you need to have some real money. And in Texas, we've been working on this problem for a while, and we've created the Texas Bullion Depository, and I'm proud to say that it's progressing so that you could put your gold on deposit in Texas, and you could use something like this. It's like a Texan card, and when we succeed, you'll be able to pull out your Texan card and take that to the Starbucks or whatever and pay for things, and it'll come out of your account. So investing, don't rule out the stock market. There's a place for it. The stock market, even if it gets blasted in the short term, hopefully you'll be in the right stocks, and if you're in the right stocks, you can do well.
As just quick follow-up to that, in the scenario that you described, which is one of extreme inflation, what would you think about the bond market? And isn't that in an extensive bubble right now?
The bond market will kill you if we move into an inflation. The problem is we're going through it's not real deflation. It's deflation of financial assets. It's not deflation of the things you're actually buying other than gasoline. But we're going through a short-term deflation that will set a panic up. The Federal Reserve starts pumping again, and that creates a hyperinflation potentially. That's what we want to avoid. So we need to do everything possible to avoid that.
All right, so now I'm going to ask a question. And by the way, you've heard this before. Stop me if you've heard this, or let me say it. Greatest gun salesman in the United States? Thank you. Buy Smith & Wesson, up 800% since he took office, and growing. You know, you mentioned some important parts of the financial market, Kevin, but state debt is not often discussed. We think of federal debt, but we have, at best accounting, somewhere between $5 and $7 trillion of state debt in this country. Eventually, the bond market can't be controlled, the feds can't control it, and the states have to work through it. What do you think?
Well, we're seeing some of that happen with Puerto Rican bonds now. Puerto Rican, part of the United States, and they're getting killed. And I'll tell you, the same thing would happen with any state that is running that much red ink, like Illinois. So yes, that's something I would be very, very concerned about if we move into a collapse of the bond market, which is something the Fed is losing control day by day. And their response is they're going to knee-jerk throw money at the problem. That's what they tend to do. And if they do that, those bond markets could get crushed.
That's why he's a New York Times best-selling author, Kevin Freeman. Thank you.